German prosecutors have charged Volkswagen's former CEO, Martin Winterkorn, with serious fraud.
What has VW been up to?
This lie was born out of an absolute ruthless ambition to be the #1 automaker in the world.
This directly affects the air that people breathe.
The state of Volkswagen. Not too long ago, Volkswagen was the world's largest automaker. They owned everything from Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, Lamborghini, Bentley, and even Bugatti. As such, they were delivering over 10 million cars every single year. Since then, Volkswagen's deliveries haven't gone down too much, but everything else has, starting with reputation. Ever since the Volkswagen emissions scandal, which cost them 31.3 billion euros, the brand has suffered from a lack of credibility and trust for obvious reasons, which has made it extremely difficult for the company to make progress. For example, their net income is only half of what it was back in 2012, and if you look at stock price, things get ugly real quick. Volkswagen is down 59% from just 2 years ago, leaving them with a market cap of just $64 billion euros. For perspective, that's roughly the same percentage fall as Tesla, but there's a magnitude of difference. Tesla crashed from a market cap of just over $1 trillion. Volkswagen, on the other hand, crashed from a valuation of just over $100 billion. So, the fact that Volkswagen is having the same difficulty holding on to a $100 billion market cap as Tesla is holding on to a $1 trillion market cap is extremely concerning. Now, you could argue that the entire automotive industry is currently down, but that's not really true. Yes, EV companies are getting destroyed, but Toyota is actually doing better than ever. And as a legacy automaker, you would think that Volkswagen behaves much more like Toyota than Rivian or Tesla. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, Toyota only delivers about 2 to 3 million more cars than Volkswagen every year, but they're worth over $300 billion, or 5 times more than Volkswagen. Even from a profit perspective, Volkswagen delivers nearly half of Toyota's profits. But again, they only boast of the valuation, which simply makes it crystal clear just how bearish investors are on Volkswagen. 206. So, here's the dire state of Volkswagen and what happened to the once dominant auto giant. Internal strife. But anyway, almost all of Volkswagen's problems can be traced back to one man, Herbert Diess, the former CEO and chairman of the Volkswagen Group. Was he an out-of-touch boomer who refused to get with the times? Well, no. Herbert was actually the exact opposite. He was more in touch with the EV market and future trends than anyone else from the legacy auto industry. In fact, he was very much an Elon Musk fanboy, and he would regularly make outrageous statements complimenting Elon and Tesla to the determinant of Volkswagen. And if you don't believe me, just take a look at the sorts of things Herbert has said. Elon Musk delivers results that many have deemed impossible. In 5 to 10 years, the world's most valuable company will be a mobility company that can be called Tesla, Apple, or Volkswagen. What worries me the most is the capabilities in the assistance systems. 500,000 Teslas work as a neural network that continuously collects data and offers the customer a new driving experience every 14 days, with improved properties. No other automobile manufacturer can do that today. Keep in mind, these statements are coming from the former CEO and chairman of Volkswagen. Now, Herbert isn't stupid. He knows that making such statements might hurt Volkswagen's stock price in the short term, and that he may be driving consumers straight to Tesla by constantly praising them. But he was okay with this, as he was trying to play the long game with Volkswagen. He strongly felt that Tesla was headed in the right direction, and he wanted to shock Volkswagen investors and board members into taking quick action. What was this quick action, you ask? Well, it was betting 84 billion euros on EV and EV development. I should also mention that this was right at the beginning of the pandemic, when Volkswagen stock was down 43%. And more concerningly, Volkswagen just had a quarter where they lost £1.4 billion. So, little to say, board members weren't exactly hyped to hear about Herbert's €84 billion plan. None of them really saw Herbert as a forward thinker who was trying to push the company in the right direction. They saw him as someone who had completely lost his way, and after all, that investment is enough to buy out the entirety of Mercedes-Benz, currently the 4th largest automaker by market cap. Now, Herbert did have some support from a few executive team members like Thomas Ulbert, the current CTO of Volkswagen, who had also made his own fair share of outrageous statements, like, United States electric car manufacturer Tesla has a 10-year start on rivals when it comes to building electric cars and software. This simply left the boardroom more divided than ever, though. You had the guys who wanted to bet it all on EVs and EVs, and you had the guys who wanted to take things slow and methodical like Toyota. One thing these guys were able to agree on though was the necessity of cuts. Herbert wanted to do cuts to better invest in EVs, and the opposition wanted to do cuts to maximize profits during the pandemic. And this ruffled the feathers of yet another subsection of the board, labor leaders. 9 out of the 19 seats on the company's supervisory board are labor union leaders and employee representatives. And naturally, these guys were strongly opposed to labor cuts, especially given the pandemic. So, you ended up with a completely divided boardroom with no clear direction. Eventually, what would happen is the labor leaders would lose out and the rest of the board would come to a compromise. The compromise was that Volkswagen would approve Herbert's crazy investment plan, but only if Herbert agreed to step away from day-to-day Volkswagen operations. He would be replaced by a cost-cutting expert named Rolf Brandstauater, who could ensure that the massive investment was spent well, and that things were running as efficiently as possible. Sounds like a good idea on paper, but when you pair a visionary idea with a cost-cutter, well, things don't exactly play out as expected. Botching EVs. By far the #1 most cited issue with Volkswagen's EV effort is unbearably bad software. Now, this doesn't have to be the case. All legacy automakers really need to do is take their existing ICE vehicles and put batteries and electric motors on them. Similar to what Ford did with the F-150 Lightning, it's basically identical to the gas F-150 except it runs on electricity. This is really all that's needed, but oftentimes, legacy automakers like to pair EV efforts with modernity efforts, as is the case with Volkswagen and especially Mercedes-Benz. If you know, you know. More times than not, these modernity efforts simply cause even more issues. Not only do customers have to adapt to using an EV and all of the hassles that come with charging and range, but they also have to deal with incompetent software. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. Volkswagen's software is so bad that they're spending $3.7 billion on a joint venture to fix it. The bottom line is that it makes little sense to take on this hassle when you can just buy a Tesla with extremely refined software, or even just a more traditional car that happens to come in an electric or hybrid variant. The other major issue that has been plaguing not just Volkswagen's EVs but all Volkswagens in general is recalls. Theoretically, one of the benefits of going with an established automaker like Volkswagen is that they're supposed to know what they're doing thanks to decades of industry experience, unlike new players like Rivian or Lucid for whom recalls are to be expected, but that's not the case whatsoever. Just late last year, Volkswagen recalled all of their .4EVs in the US due to flammable interior materials, and more recently, they recalled over 260,000 gas vehicles due to leaky fuel pumps. So, when you go with Volkswagen, you're not really getting better reliability on the car side of things or the software side of things. But all of that just tells half the story. The reality is that much of the current state of Volkswagen is not due to any one thing that Volkswagen did wrong, but rather just general market sentiment and competition. Starting with market sentiment, the average person is not nearly as gung-ho about EVs as EV investors and enthusiasts thought. In fact, the average person is still rather skeptical about EVs, primarily due to concerns regarding charging and range. It seems that they would much rather own a hybrid vehicle and wait for charging tech and infrastructure to advance before making the jump. In fact, sales of plug-in hybrids increased by 83% last year, while sales of regular EVs only grew by 21%. As such, Volkswagen is having to walk back on their EV-first approach and go back to hybrids. And that brings us to likely the biggest concern: competition. For starters, you've got all the EV startups like Tesla, Rivian, and Lucid who all enjoy much more hype and media coverage than Volkswagen. But that's not even the biggest concern. The biggest concern for Volkswagen is actually Chinese EV makers, and more specifically BYD. You might not be familiar with BYD because they're basically non-existent in Western markets, but within China and Asian markets, they're exploding in popularity. In fact, BYD is now the third largest automaker in the world by market cap. BYD is even delivering more cars than Tesla, currently at a pace of over 2 million vehicles per year. And do you know where BYD is getting all this market share from? It's of course Volkswagen. Volkswagen was actually the best-selling brand in China for years, but last year, they lost this title to BYD. In terms of electric vehicles, Volkswagen has actually fallen all the way to number 8 within the Chinese market. And looking forward, things are only expected to get worse as Volkswagen continues to lose market share. So, is there any hope for Volkswagen? An uncertain future. Truth be told, the future for Volkswagen is looking rather bleak. If you're wondering what happened to that forward-thinking CEO, Herbert Diess, well, he was completely ousted from the company in mid-2022. So you can bet that current executives are gonna be far more careful when it comes to EVs. Maybe that's a good thing though. EV adoption is obviously not happening as quickly as people like Elon Musk and Herbert Diess envisioned, so maybe it actually makes more sense for Volkswagen to take a slow and methodical approach when it comes to electrification. After all, that's exactly what Toyota has elected to do, and their stock price is higher than ever. With that being said though, the state of Toyota is completely different from that of Volkswagen. Toyota has a legendary reputation for reliability, and that's one of the main reasons why consumers are willing to deal with Toyota's slower rate of progress. It might take Toyota a while to do EVs or tech or self-driving, but when they do eventually do it, you can bet that it'll be done right. Volkswagen, on the other hand, doesn't have any one such factor working in their favor. In fact, they have many such factors working against them. This includes Dieselgate, unreliable software, and a slew of recalls. They're also not leaders in EVs or autonomy despite unprecedented investments. They've also unloaded some of their biggest brands including Bugatti, and they're slowly selling off their stake in Porsche. At this point, it kind of seems like the only reason Volkswagen is big is because they were already big. This isn't to say that Volkswagen is about to get wiped off the map altogether, but it does seem like Volkswagen is about to become a shell of their former selves, just like what happened to other industry giants like Philips and GE. And that is the dire state of Volkswagen.